Have you ever been so scared that you felt sick? Like physically sick from fear? Well, that's how I felt when I looked into my kitchen and saw something trying to be me. Its features were distorted and its voice was unnatural. I don't know how I escaped, but I did, and I don't feel safe. I'll never feel safe, not again. Following my encounter with my deformed doppelganger, I started to suffer from constant night terrors, waking up in the night feeling the stare of something. My husband, David, eventually convinced me to see a psychologist who prescribed me with several medications intended to prevent my night terrors and the paranoia. Although I avoided taking them for quite some time, in the end I gave in and I took them just to appease David's nagging, but it didn't help. If anything, it made me feel less safe, being drugged up and unable to defend myself. After almost 3 months of terrifying nightmares and fears of that thing coming to get me, David and I moved out of his house and began renting a nice apartment further into the city, away from the house, and thankfully closer to David's work. Finally, I could sleep again without waking up from the feeling of something staring at me. But my relationship with David even started improving, and we even started trying to have kids. But despite everything going well in our lives, I still remember that thing's face, its voice, everything about it. One morning, I awoke and felt very nauseous. It wasn't only after I ate that I threw up. I took one of the pregnancy tests that we had bought, and I was pregnant. I had to wait for David to come home, but he was ecstatic, and the second he heard about it. This joy, however, would quickly turn tail that very night as I lay in bed, wrapped up beside David. My eyes were suddenly drawn to the vent in the wall. Easily the cause of many episodes of paranoia, and it would be the cause of yet another one. I rolled over and snuggled onto David, a fruitless endeavor due to him sleeping on his stomach. However, I felt it again. That feeling of being watched. Every hair on the back of my neck started to stand on end as I attempted to ignore it. Lydia. A brief and barely audible hiss came from somewhere in the room. I froze in horror as goosebumps shot up my spine, gripping onto David as I held him as tight as I possibly could. David, I gently whispered, tears in my eyes from the sheer memories of that thing. He didn't move. David. My voice quivered as I shook him gently. He mumbled as his eyes slowly opened to greet mine. Shh. I stared at him, wide-eyed and filled with fear. What is it? David thankfully whispered. I think there's something in here with us. I trembled as I felt the tears run down my face and onto the pillow, soaking it beneath me. David slowly and gently got onto his side and wrapped his arms around me in a loving embrace. It's okay, babe. I felt somewhat safer as he held me, and somehow I even drifted off to sleep. The next morning, I woke up still in David's arms, something I was thankful for as I snuggled into his warm hold. After about 20 minutes, his alarm went off and he set off for work while I went into the living room to watch some TV. As I watched, however, I heard a metallic scraping sound from above me. Maybe in the vents running through the apartment complex. Crap, I grumbled to myself before returning to watch TV and drinking tea. The scrapes continued and quickly started to get on my nerves as I stood up and stormed into my bedroom to investigate. The scraping continued and quickly started to get on my nerves as I stood up and stormed into my bedroom to investigate the vent. I let out a sigh as I picked up the screwdriver from the bedside table and which I used it to move the cold metal plate over the vent. Using the flashlight on my phone, I peered down only to recoil out of the vent in horror. It was me, with the same deformed features, wearing that same pajamas all those months ago. It crawled out like a snake, slithering through the nearby ventilation shafts. Knowing it was the only way into the apartment besides the front door, I quickly and shakily screwed the hatch back on before frantically dragging and pushing the tall dresser in front of it, sealing it up to the best of my ability. I felt my organs move aside to make my way for the vomit, but alas, it never came, and I was left with a horrible feeling in my stomach and the knowledge that it was after me again, trying to take my form and steal my life from me again. It would never pass from me, I reasoned with myself. It looks too unnatural, I thought as I was pacing to release the buildup of energy. I grabbed my phone and immediately phoned David. Yeah, David's voice thankfully poured through my phone. David, it's here. It's that thing Hun, I'm at work. Just take your meds and try to calm down. Stress isn't good for the baby, he warned before he hung up. Damn it, I growled in fear and frustration. I threw my phone to one side and ran to the front door to make certain it was locked. It was, thank heaven. I continued to pace around the apartment for God knows how long until David returned home with a briefcase full of paperwork that would keep him busy into the long night. Before long, me and David were back to arguing just like before we moved. I don't think I've ever screamed quite as loud as anyone in my entire life. Certainly woke up the neighbors with our yelling. Soon after the argument, I stormed off to bed and immediately wrapped myself up and tried to get some sleep before a strange thought came to my head. The dresser. The dresser had moved. I shined my torch at the dresser and the now wide open vent. Oh crap, was all I could squeeze out before I heard something approaching the bedroom door. Lydia. David's voice called through. I'm sorry about our argument. Can I come in? Door's unlocked, I mumbled. David entered and immediately looked at the vent, and my heart sank as I saw my doppelganger appear behind him. It dragged him away, and kicking and screaming by the ankles, the lights in the apartment all went out simultaneously, leaving me blind in the abysmal darkness. I screamed David's name as I fumbled in the dark before shining my light into the living room to see the mimicker changing form. It used its clawed hands to tear away at the flesh intended to look like me, and it gargled and grunted, its shape slowly starting to resemble a grown, well-built man. I remember the sound of its individual teeth falling out to make way for new ones. While it was distracted with its metamorphosis, I sprinted back to the bedroom and shakily opened the window. I heard the creature stop groaning.
Lydia?
David's distorted voice softly spoke from behind me. Before I could process anything, I felt it grab me from behind. I instinctively grabbed the screwdriver from the bedside table and drove it into the impersonator's face, causing it to let me go. It had taken the appearance of David, though he looked hideous. His eyes were abnormally large and his mouth was hanging agape, wider than any mouth should be able to do as it drooled black mucus. Without a second thought, I threw myself out of the window and onto the cold metal balcony stairwell. I sprinted down the flight of steps before dropping down, twisting my ankle in the process. I only got away with the help of my neighbor, Frank, who discreetly got me to the hospital. I tried to report my husband's death to the police, only to be shocked that David Noble is perfectly fine and living in his apartment. I knew it wasn't him. Not anymore. Rather than tell them that the monster had been hunting me for what felt like years now, I instead decided to rather quietly move away from David and the apartment. It's been 2 years since the mimicker took David's form. I've been living alone with my son. His name is Trenton. Since David's death, I don't know what the thing wanted, but it has not haunted me since. Perhaps it was simply after David's visage rather than my own. Now that creature lives in our apartment. It goes to David's place of work, and it generally lives David's life. It's perfected David's appearance from what little I can gather the few times I've driven past. It's done much better than it did with my form. I don't know what will come next in my life. David's gone, but I still have Trent and what little remains of my paranoia-driven psyche. But if it comes for me or my son, I will find a way to kill it. Mark my words.